Welcome everybody to Best Practices Managing Complex Continuing Education. John Lay and Bill Snowdon here are going to be your hosts for today, and we'll introduce ourselves in just a bit. You know, when you create a webinar topic that has a topic like Best Practices Managing Complex Continuing Education, and you get people from every corner of the world signing up, it shows you that it's a relevant and an important topic that professionals everywhere in every country and corner of the world have to deal with. We were surprised. We offered up a recording registered. We actually saw registrants from 23 different countries, from Australia, New Zealand, and Brazil, and Argentina, and the UK, and Canada, and Mexico. And what we take from all of that is that no matter where you're at inside the world, if you're managing continuing education and you have multiple jurisdictions to worry about, things get complicated in a hurry. And so that's why we created this webinar for today. And what we're going to do today, we got a busy agenda for all of those. Thanks for everybody for registering and attending. For all those that have attended Talented Learning webinars in the past, you know, there's a lot of information packed in, talking fast as we try to cover a lot of topics and not the same topics that everybody else covers. And so today we're going to dig into the introduction to continuing education. And then we're going to take a look at the size of the CE market and the research, show you some of the research that we've done just to put a number and a scope on it. And I guarantee you'll be staggered on how big that is. And then we're going to peel the onion a little more and look down and at the tools and the technologies to manage continuing education, what's out there in the marketplace, and how do organizations do it and cobble it together. And that's all going to lead up to the top 5 best practices here in managing continuing education or managing complex CEUs. And so recently, eLogic Learning here commissioned us for Talented Learning to do a research paper on this very topic and to dig down deep into the weeds of continuing education. And as a result, we went and we interviewed people from a whole variety of industries, both the professionals that take continuing education or consume it, the organizations that sell it and provide it, and then also the accreditation bodies. And we looked at it from all these different sides and interviews, and to learn how it was working in different industries. And we put that all together, the best practices that we learned from all of that, into today's presentation. You can use the question or the chat window in the go-to panel to submit questions, and we'll take them periodically here throughout the 45 minutes, and we'll answer questions at the end and until they're gone. And if we don't get to your question for some reason, we'll make sure that we follow up individually. But let's get into a little introduction. So that's how we're going to go through today. So my name's John Lay. I'm the CEO and lead analyst of Talented Learning. I spent 13 years selling high-end learning management systems, and I focused the majority of my time in that 13 years selling to extended enterprise and selling to associations that were managing continuing education. And so I spent a lot of time throughout my career working with organizations that have this particular problem and trying to solve it with the solutions I had at that time. About a year and a half ago, I decided to hang up my sales shoes and help organizations buy learning management systems instead of selling them to them. And so I started researching the industry and founded Talented Learning and researched the industry so that we could be the place to go about extended enterprise or training for a business or selling your training, all that necessarily non-employee training aspects of it. And as a part of that, I reviewed now 81 different learning management systems in the last 18 months, and in-depth reviews of talking with executives and demoing them and getting demos from organizations and really trying to understand what organizations are good at. And it's that process that led me to Bill Snowdon, who I'll let introduce himself as CTO of eLogic Learning. Bill?
Thanks, John. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad to be a part of this discussion today for sure. You know, I am the Chief Technology Officer of eLogic Learning, 20 years experience in just driving what that technology looks like for a multitude of applications, and hopefully can share some insight of what we found along the way, or as we developed and went through this process for complex CEUs. Again, thanks again for the opportunity.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah.
This will be good. Let's start right off with a survey here. We got people from all over. Let's go ahead and launch this out. Polls open.
Excellent. So, what is the biggest challenge in managing continuing education out there? I'll be interesting to see, because I think all of those pose challenges. Reporting state requirements is definitely, if it's not the top one, probably be pretty high up there. Notifications on due dates, reminders, expiatorials when it expires, etc.
You're managing CEUs, and you got something that's a bigger problem than the ones on the list. Text it into the chat box, and we'll shout it out here.
Yeah, for sure. So it'll be interesting to see what they come back with.
And we say state-to-state requirements. Probably a better way to phrase that is jurisdiction to jurisdiction, because
sure, governing bodies is one.
Anywhere.
Yeah. Those get pretty complex, but the reporting on them does too.
Well, it looks like, as you predicted, the jurisdiction by jurisdiction requirements leading the way. Let's close this out and show what everybody voted here. So we'll close that and share the poll, and then you can see what happened here. So, yeah, almost half the folks, or 41% anyway, work with the state-by-state requirements, and that'll be a theme here throughout the day, because that is the root of all evil when it comes to managing complex CEUs, and we'll talk about that here in a second. But the other three, equally challenging, and really they're in some ways all a reflection of that managing state by state. So, all right, well, good. So let's just start at the beginning real quick, and we'll build from there. So what is continuing education? It's a broad definition, and depending on who you ask, it can be a lot narrower than we defined it here. But based on my research, I think it's continuing education is defined as the training provided to adults after they left the formal education process. And so it comes in a lot of different shapes and sizes and forms. It can be individuals just going to lynda.com or BizLibrary, an organization like that, or a university that's offering a MOOC and taking it for their own self-edification. That's certainly continuing education. Listening to an audio book is continuing education. Reading a white paper on the internet is continuing education. But those are the informal ones, and not necessarily what organizations think about. It's maybe what individuals think about, but not what organizations think about. They think about the formal continuing education. That's like earning your project management professional certificate, or your chartered accountant, or your CPA, or your doctor's or surgeon's degree. Those type of certifications that are actually degrees or licenses. But the key thing is that they have the reoccurring element of maintaining that certification. So what training or types of training or credits of training do you need to take on a regular basis, whether that's 1 year or 2 years or 3 years, to maintain that license so that you can practice out in the marketplace? And at first blush, you might think that it's just a couple of industries, but we'll see in a moment here. It's every industry has this certification. But let's take a step back real quick and look at the types of certification, because this is important to get your head around where complex certifications come from. And if anybody is using an LMS to manage your employees or your continuing education, you know that there's, and if you shop for one, you know that there's a wide variety of capabilities out there from an LMS standpoint. And the reason is because there's 3 names or 3 concepts really for the same thing, and a vendor just say yes, and you have to be very specific on which one that you're actually talking about. So the first type of certification, and this is the kind that almost every LMS or everybody can do, is just your corporate one. So maybe you have a new sales certification program or certification class, or a new employee introduction class, onboarding class, and then you quote unquote certify them. essentially you give them some training and then you make them pass an assessment. There's no portability to this. You get a certification at AT&T. It's not applicable at another telecommunication company. It's intra-company specific, and it's one-to-one. So typically, like, you take this class, you get 1 credit for taking this class, or you get the certificate for taking the class. But it's very easy to manage, and every LMS can manage that. But where it starts to get a little trickier is when you get into product-specific certifications. And you see these, the best examples are like the Microsoft Certified Systems Engineer or Cisco Certified Network Associate, and Dell has one, and Rackspace has one, and everybody has one of their certifications. And what they want to do is they want to get the certification out so that people outside of the company, so that independents become certified on their products so that they could provide Microsoft products and services to the end clients. And these are very portable because every organization would want certified this or certified that, as long as it's applicable. But still, there's only one jurisdiction body here. It's Microsoft, it's Dell, it's Cisco. They're the ones saying how much the credit is worth. They're the ones that are rolling out the training and coming up with the assessment, and it's not measured by anybody else. But the last one here, this is where the rubber meets the road. It's the professional-wide certifications. Think of this as the jobs, the surgeons, the accountants, the architects, the pilots, all those type of things. Electricians, it goes across all levels of society, as it turns out, from not the simplest jobs, but very straightforward, working with your hands jobs, all the way up to being a rocket scientist. You have the ability to get certified for your profession, and if you're not certified for your profession, you can't practice that profession. So it's a way to lock out anybody in that profession that doesn't want to go through this process. But this is the toughest to manage, and the reason is because there's in most cases, in 95% of the cases, there's no global standard nor national standard to these certifications, but rather it rolls down to the jurisdiction level. In the U.S., the states, Canada, the provinces, where they're responsible for defining at that level exactly how many credits that you need. And it's different for different industries. And we'll get into show you some examples. But that's where the complex CEUs start, is that now we have to start thinking about multiple jurisdictions. So if you have employees or you're selling to multiple jurisdictions, you have to know all those rules and calculate for them. Now, if it's just 1 or 2, it's not so hard. If you start getting 3 or 4 or 10 or 55, it's impossible to manage manually, and that is the challenge. And so continuing education, as I indicated, is required for many professions. And where you see it a lot is in healthcare. So all the doctors and nurses and technicians and radiologists and surgeons, they need their continuing education, and that's great. I don't want anybody operating on me that hasn't been in the classroom for a little bit. But our education system all around the world is doing teachers and aides and administration and having significant amount of hours that they have to continue better themselves throughout their career. In real estate, you have to have agents and appraisers and brokers, and if anybody just wants to do something like this for fun, you could Google professional certification, or rather go to Wikipedia and go to professional certification, and there's literally like hundreds of certifications listed. But in real estate, there's the accredited land consultant, certified commercial investment member, certified property manager, fellow of the Real Estate Institute, certified leasing specialist, certified marketing director, certified retail executive. It goes on and on. In each one of these industries where you can get certification based on a program of study and a class. It works with accountants and lawyers and actuaries and anybody that's building bridges or roads or engineers or surveys in public safety, in occupational, food safety, drivers, cosmetologists, barbers, electricians, plumbers, people working with heating and air conditioning, all need certifications initially, and then the maintenance of these certifications. And so the size of the continuing education market as a result is really ginormous. We found a report from the 2014 U.S. Census Bureau report that was measuring alternative education credentials. So it was their name for continuing education. And this is just the U.S. alone, and only because you would have to go country by country, industry by industry to get a global picture of how big the actual global market is. We only dug as deep as looking at the most readable access here in the U.S., but 46 million U.S. adults hold some sort of professional certificate, and another 20 million, or almost 20 million, have an educational certificate. And all in all, that accounts for 25%. 1 out of every 4 of the adult U.S. population is engaged in the continuing education, ongoing continuing education. From a Georgetown University report, we found that they put a dollar value of $47 billion for the market of, including those who create continuing education, sell it, and consume it. Those amounts to that much inside the U.S. economy, which is just amazing from just a sheer value perspective. Coincidentally, one of the things that we noticed in that report is that out of all that they're measuring, only 10% was delivered via online learning or e-learning. The optimist in me looks at this as just a huge, tremendous opportunity for the continuing education market to shift into more self-paced learning or blended learning opportunities. But just to give you a flavor of how big this actually is, if those 65 million people, the 46 and the 19 that hold these certificates, all had to take just 10 hours, which is a really conservative estimate, we're looking at 650 million hours of content consumed in a given year. That is a lot of continuing education, a lot of learning that's going on around the world. And just as a comparison, from a 2014 report that we found by Josh Burson, a person by Deloitte, certainly one of the experts here in this industry, he estimates the LMS market at $2.4 billion. And I thought, geez, that's a big disconnect, isn't it? $2.4 billion versus $47 billion. How come the LMS market is so small if there's that much continuing education that has to be managed? It seems like a disproportionately small amount. And the reason is complex continuing education credits are hard to manage, and most LMSs can't do it. And so that is the takeaway that we've had. But Bill, just sorry, I'm hogging the stage here. Do you have any thoughts here? Is this what you would think, working inside of continuing education all these years? Do you think this number is accurate, low, high?
I think it's a little low. I mean, you look at, that's what you got reported there, right? So if you look at the informal CE market, and who knows what that really could look like, and put that on top of this, I bet that's more of a, a 30-35% of the number goes up, and that 47 billion becomes 57 or 60, because you have a lot of the CE market that's not even represented in some of this, depending on if it's just your, back in the day when you would go get your Novell certification, like you talked about, your Cisco certification or whatever the case may be, some of those informal ones that are being taken aren't shown here. I guarantee that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no doubt. No doubt the Census Bureau should hire talented learning here. We'll dig into the next level for them.
For sure.
All right. So if we always selling. So if you dig in just into one of those industries, so just dig a little bit deeper, and or rather look at that 46 million employees, and you look at it, you see that 27% of it is from the healthcare industry, education being the next one, and business management and support, the accountants, lawyers, auditors, in third place with IT. So, but what was surprising is just how much what healthcare is. And so we got to thinking about why that could possibly be, and really the reason is that there's just almost a countless number of types of physicians and types of surgeons and nurses and medical support, and just layering on all those complexities of each one of those positions, it makes it the most where real estate might have 10, or there might be 20 types of accountants. So dig deeper just one more time, and we look into the continuing education market, just for medical education, in that 27% that we just showed, and they had almost 25 million participants. This is from the American Council of Continuing Medical Education, which keeps track of all the medical education delivered in all states by these 1,950 accredited providers. But nonetheless, they put on 1 million hours and completed reached 24 million people. I mean, that's just a staggering amount of people. So, but the medical industry all is about the complex and the multiple jurisdictions. But Bill, you're an expert on that. Why don't you take it from here?
Sure. So on the couple things here. I mean, in most cases, you have it diagrammed here in simple and complex. So you're simple or easy, right? It's a one-to-one. I go in, I take some curriculum for a sustained amount of hours, or whatever the time may be, and I earn a credit for that. It's done. It's good wherever that certification lies. The complex ones get into, just like you talked about, I would say the three biggest are medical, your accounting practices that are known out there. They may not be the deepest body, but that are known. And the law practices, those guys constantly have different variations by state. A course in PA is worth X, and then in New York it's worth Y based on your ethic credits or accounting credits. It just depends. And then you take that and multiply it and spiderweb it out across states, across other professions inside of that. You talked about the medical profession. If you just stop and think of an emergency room or somebody in an operating room, all of the people in that operating room, the different licenses that have to have just for the people standing in that room, and then you multiply that, it gives you a depth of how complex it can get. You get difference of reporting and standards and how you report to the governing bodies, whether it's state or it's NASBA or ACCME or whoever the case may be, what the durations are, what the expiration dates for the rural periods, all of the stuff that you can do there. If you have compliancy, what those windows are. If you're out of compliant, how do you get it? And then your reporting deadlines, reporting to get it in the hands of the right people to make sure they know you're still compliant it's probably the key thing, because you can do all the work and not get reported and you wouldn't be shown as compliant, or your license may be expired, etc. So the complexity just goes deeper and deeper depending on which sector you're in from that aspect.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, wow, no doubt. No doubt. Let's see what the audience thinks about all that.
Yeah. What industry has the most complex CEUs to manage? This will be interesting. I have my thoughts.
Yeah, no, I have my thoughts.
All of those can get pretty complex, but some of them aren't as deep as the others.
Oh. Look at this, though. We're getting a dead heat here. Accountants, doctors, lawyers.
Well, we got an even mix on the line?
We got an even mix. Looks like doctors that are pulling it out. Doctors, healthcare, up to 40%.
Nice.
Yeah, well, that doesn't surprise me, because that's how I voted too.
Yeah, just so much deeper. I mean, like accountants, you may have 6 different flavors, right, in where you need to be inside there, where the doctors, etc., there's multiple flavors. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and it's, you just think of like you were talking about the emergency room, but just think of like a hospital complex that, might be, like MedStar Health or something in Washington, D.C. that's got a series of 6 or 7 hospitals and universities associated with that. Just think about the complexity of all the different types of medical professionals that they have in there, not just in that emergency room, but in 50 emergency rooms, and how to proactively notify them and let them know what their requirements are and keep them certified in multiple states. It truly is a big process. So anyway, why don't you show us some of this real quick, Bill, on what is different.
Yeah, just kind of give you an overlay. So NASBA is the governing body for accountants, and you can see just in this simple diagram here where what you would be constituted for certification in Florida is completely different for New Jersey, but some of the content's the same. The curriculum would be the same. It depends on the longevity of it too. You can see where one's every 2-year reporting period and one's a 3. Same same certification, just completely different. Now where it can get even more complex is if you're an accountant in Florida and New Jersey. Then you got to manage both of these and report to the right governing bodies, and what works for what one may not work for the other, et cetera. For sure.
Gets pretty strategic from like the individual standpoint too, because they got to make sure they pick classes. Otherwise, they're taking 200 hours of content if they've got multiple licenses in these different states. So they got to try to find the right content that's applicable across these different buckets of requirements they have.
Yeah, you definitely want some multi-purpose content, because as you said, if not, you would be taking multiple hours for same things. Make sure your ethics cross over, your accounting crosses over, things you need to take, they cross over jurisdictions, because then you're kind of limiting, you're putting a little bit of a cap on it, but it's still work and complexity there to get there for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
HCCME.
Sorry about that. There we go.
No worries. Is that the one we're at now?
Yeah.
So this is the medical governing body, and you can see, again, this is a very, very, conservative look at the difference between 4 quick states, but just what the difference is and what the window is. Where, Arkansas is, 20 hours for a single year, which would, in the 4-year term with New California, it'd be 80 hours versus the 100 hours you have for the California. So completely different by state. I think regulations by state drive some of this, the complexity, because some states have different regulations, and that's a whole another conversation. But that drives some of the complexity as well. In the medical field, the accounting field, the legal field itself. Well, it does.
Yeah, and even a layer of complexity on top of that yet is like in California, you have those 100 hours, and even though the window is 4 years, you still can't wait till the 4th year to take it all. So there's still rules about the minimum that you can take, even in the first, second, and third years. So somebody has to manage that, either manually or the physician themselves or the LMS.
Well, you bring up a good point, because some of them dictate you can only take 20 hours a year. You have to take different types of delivery methods, which means some have to be in person, some have to be online. I mean, it can dictate a lot of different things, and those complexities really get different. Can get complex and difficult to manage as you push through that, and are in some cases, especially if you're doing it in a manual or a spreadsheet, if that's how it's being practiced today. Again, another look at the American Bar Association here. You can see some differences between Pennsylvania and Rhode Island, just on the same piece, what it really looks like. I think Pennsylvania's really nice, giving you 60 minutes per credit hour, as opposed to Rhode Island giving you 50 minutes. You lose 10 minutes every hour. Thank you for being graceful, but you can see the complexity, and this is a simple one for a lawyer. And lawyers they're always fighting. We've talked to a lot of law firms and CPA firms and medicals at that as well. Managing this on a day-to-day basis is very difficult for them, and being able to report back to it.
Yeah. So this is the reason why. This is my theory on the industry. This is the reason why that the LMS industry is only $2.4 billion, with a $46 billion or $47 billion continuing education, because to manage all this for one industry would take a powerful piece of software, but to make it generic enough that you could do it across 10 of these industries is it's almost like rocket science to be able to manage all those complexities at once. And I think what ended up happening, or what does end up happening, is that these organizations find a way to do it without an LMS or in addition to their LMS. And so I dug in deep about what technologies are out there in these different industries. And what I find is there's a whole lot of custom-built software. Organizations just couldn't find it commercially off the shelf to be able to manage this complexity, so they started building their own software that could do exactly that. It has its positives and negatives, as you can imagine. It's good because you're getting software that has to do that. It's bad because being a software company and a continuing education manager are not necessarily congruent type activities. Stay up top of technology and continue to move the the product, the custom product alone, typically doesn't happen. It kind of gets stuck in time. And so what happens with these organizations that are managing these certifications is they have the custom-built software. They've got multiple versions of multiple spreadsheets that they're using to try to track things offhand. What's Pennsylvania's rules, what's New Jersey's rules are all tabs in the spreadsheet. If you go to certain industries like NASB's accounting and continuing medical education, at least in the U.S., there's CEU trackers or specific tracking software and mapping software to state requirements that exist, but it's only by industry base, and it's not learning. It's not a learning management system. It's a fancy spreadsheet. And organizations are using survey engines like SurveyMonkey and assessment engines that are out there to create this test and assessment so they can measure pre-test and post-tests and prove that their content has efficacy for the accreditation boards. And so there's a lot of different technologies out there, and there's also in the industry 600 plus learning management systems. But without a doubt, they're good at those corporate certifications, they're good at those product certifications, but they're just not good in most cases at the professional certifications. So all that said, let's get into these best practices. Just a couple questions quick, we'll knock this out. There's a couple questions around why would somebody, from an individual standpoint, why would you want continuing education? And it just makes you more marketable, I think, if nothing else. One, it makes you a lifelong learner and continuing to become better at your profession, but it also makes you just more marketable going from organization to organization. The second question here is, how would that tie into the liability insurance, or let me read that exactly. How is consulting education or continuing education tied to liability insurance for errors and omissions? And the way that that's tied is that you would only have people that are working in those sensitive jobs that have those certifications, and they use that almost as risk aversion. One, to know that the person has the right skills and competencies to do it, but two, from a cover themselves perspective, they want to be able to go back and prove that they did the right things organizationally on hiring somebody that actually held the appropriate licenses. So it ties into every industry like that. You wouldn't hire an architect if they weren't certified, because what if the building fell down? You'd be liable, of course. So at its simplest form. So the best practices, these aren't my best practices. This is really what we assembled from talking to literally dozens of different people. So number one, learn your CE ecosystem, your continuing education ecosystem. And so, what does that mean? So if you're a doctor and you've spent the last 30 years inside of continuing medical education, maybe all this comes naturally. But if you just happen to get a job at your local hospital, or you're now working in the continuing education department in H&R Block, and you don't come from that particular industry, it would almost be like you're speaking a different language with all the acronyms and codes and jargon on each one of these industries. So if you're in an industry, you got to learn the jargon. That's just the way it is, and who the players are inside that CE ecosystem. And so you have the providers. They're the training companies, the universities, colleges, community colleges, vocational schools, associations, institutes. They're the ones that are selling the training, providing the training to their members. But they can only provide that training if they get accredited by the accreditation bodies. So this is in many cases the government, state governments, industry boards. In some cases, it could be associations. But some examples. The Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Radiologists. The Joint Commission of Allied Health Professionals, Personnel, and Ophthalmology. There's a million of these accreditation bodies, and the accreditation bodies accredit the providers and their content so that we have high-quality content in each one of these industries. And then there's the organizational continuing education manager. So this is like looking at your employees and making sure they have the right content and the right skills, and proactively managing that. A lot of responsibility rests on the individual themselves, but an organization still has to manage it from their own perspective to make sure that nothing slips through the cracks. And then finally, there's the people that are actually consuming this continuing education, and those those 65 million people in the U.S. anyway, and probably closer to 100. Well, who knows, since we didn't measure it, but it would have to be hundreds of millions, you would think, across the global footprint. So those are your cast of players, and you have to basically know who they are, identify those audiences for each industry and really each specialty that you're touching. So, you know, if you are in healthcare and you're working with multiple healthcare accreditation boards, you know, the American Board of Medical Specialties, the ACCME that we talked about, the American Board of Family Medicine, the American Medical Association, giving too many American examples, but, you know, all of those, you know, come with their own accreditations. And so if you have individuals or you're managing individuals that touch those different pieces, you have to figure out not only who all those accreditation bodies are, but what's the interrelation working to those credit bodies. So out of these icons here on there, there's rules and interrelationships between these medical professions or medical accreditations. And so it's a spaghetti of options, but you have no choice but to figure out where all the ends of those spaghetti pieces are and understand who the jurisdiction are, what the requirements, all those things Bill talked about from going from a state to state in those different industries. And once you have all that figured out, well, then you're ready to you know, move on to the next practice. And the next best practice is to conduct a technology and business process audit. And what does that mean? Well, what it means is that, let me tell you a quick story. So this guy was cooking one day, and his buddies were standing around. He was cooking a pot roast, and so they were watching him prepare it, and he cut off the two ends of the pot roast, and he threw it into the pot with all the rest of the vegetables and parsley and so forth. And his buddy said, well, why did you cut those ends off like that? He's like, oh, I don't know. That's how my mom did it. And so the next time he saw his mom, he asked her, you know, how she made a pot roast, and she did it the exact same way with cutting the ends off, and she didn't know why, and so they made it to the grandmother, who eventually told them that the reason they cut the ends off is because when they were growing up, they didn't have a pot big enough for the roast. And so the moral of the story is, you know, why do we do things the way that we do? Sometimes we don't know why we do things the way that we do. And what I found as an LMS selection consultant inside of continuing education is that a lot of organizations have been doing it the same way for 5 or 10 years, and they really don't know why. The decisions were made before them, and so that's why you have to do a technology audit. You got to figure out which of those technology platforms is your organization using, for what? How much does that cost you? What is the interrelationship between those technology platforms? How do those spreadsheets come into play? And then you have to look at that next layer and say, okay, what are all the manual processes that I have to go from this system to this system, and, you know, update this in a spreadsheet, and then send this email manually, and then run this report, and then do my own filtering and search criteria or embedding in with other data. You know, what are all those manual processes, and what does that cost you? It's really important to understand exactly what you're doing right now, because what you may not be aware of is that there's solutions right in front of your face that you just haven't considered because you haven't done this audit, or you haven't decided why you're making that pot roast the way that you are. You haven't identified that. And so the first thing is do you know what your current vendors can do? I mean, the pace of technology is rapid. As I told you, I reviewed 81 LMSs here in this year, but what I found is I can't even keep up, because out of those 81 that I reviewed, probably 81 of them now have had 1, 2, or 3 releases, you know, since that last time. And so it's a constant struggle to stay current on what these vendors can do. Well, if you haven't looked at your vendors in a while, and perhaps your salesperson got lost or moved on, and, you know, nobody talks to you anymore from a vendor standpoint, you don't realize or notify what's going on. So you should invite your vendors in, your partners in, and have them do their new song and dance of what the capabilities are, what other organizations are doing, what are best practices doing. And because what you may find is that you'll have the opportunity to sunset some of those separate systems. So maybe the assessment, or the, you know, maybe you have multiple LMSs, or maybe you can get rid of, you know, some of these processes. But you can't ever do that unless you keep current of what your current vendor solutions could do. But that's not enough. That rolls into best practice number 3. You got to stay current with the technology landscape that's out there in the marketplace. So just in the last 5 years, we've had hundreds of LMS companies that were born because of the evolution of the cloud, of keeping the software in the cloud, and it reduced the barriers to entry. And so there's all new kinds of competition, specialties in the marketplace. And so you can't stop researching the industry. Even, you don't have to do it as crazy as I do it of reviewing 81 LMSs, but it is important to join LinkedIn social groups, you know, go to ATD or the eLearning Guild show once a year or once every 2 years, you know, read case studies, follow the blogs, you know, those type of things to keep yourself abreast on the industry, because if you hear what your peers are doing in similar member-based organizations or continuing education providers, it might give you ideas on how you can knock out some of those manual processes that you may have. But the other thing is that the best organizations, they're not afraid to switch out technology once they have the appropriate cost-benefit ratio or analysis. But the only way you can ever know that is if you do an audit in the first place to figure out where you're at and measure ongoing from there. Measure, measure, measure is key of actually seeing your process inside of here. But if there's another technology that would allow you to consolidate 3 systems into one and it only costs 2/3 of the 3 systems, well, that's probably a smart thing to do, and then take that remainder money and invest that into your content and into building your business. So in the spirit of that, we're going to send you, as a result of coming to this webinar, a white paper where we outline in more detail here kind of the levels of LMS support. But we've touched on a lot of this, so I'll jump through these real quick. But from an LMS standpoint, there's really 3 levels, or I've identified 3 levels of support. There's that basic level, and that basic level of support does those corporate certifications. The one-to-one allows you to download a certificate, take a little bit of training, take an assessment. Just about every LMS can do that to some degree. The next layer of that complexity is what Bill was talking about today, which is being able to identify rules and regulations for the different states and the different jurisdictions and lay those onto courses and have multiple types of credit available for the same course, and the user only gets credit based on information that's in their user profile, whether they're a doctor or a lawyer or a nurse, and so that would get them a different amount, and they're licensed in these states, so that would get them you know, credits in these particular states. So that's that whole intermediate level to manage that multiple jurisdiction, and it comes with, you know, dashboards and automatic reporting, and you're selling your content, you know, even things like promotions and bundles and things like that. And then finally the advanced layer, and this is the rare stuff, and that's the automatic integrations with all these accreditation bodies, sending them the information that they want in the way that they want it, doing the automatic updating, knocking all the manual processes out, both for administrators and for end users. You know, these are capabilities that exist inside the LMS marketplace right now, and so it's you know, if you're doing all these things manually, you know, audit trails, or, you know, if you do get audited by your accreditation body and, you know, that causes you pain, or just the thought of that causes you pain, you know, you don't have the right technology, because you should be able to just click a button and get the exact audit report of anything that the auditors want to do without actually going through a big laborious process. So in the spirit of that, let's we wanted you to show this. This is what got me excited here previously, and that's what we wanted to show you here today is, let me get this over to you, Bill. Make presenter. Is, so I've been banging my head against complex continuing education my whole career here. Make Bill the presenter, yes? There you go. I just have to share out, Bill. And I've been banging my head against it, trying to figure out how to do it, and always cobble together and grow the solutions over those years. And so when I got a chance to see this, I thought everybody should see it. So all yours, Bill. You may be on mute.
Excellent. Excellent. You see the screen okay?
I do.
Excellent. So I'm just going to kind of a 50,000-foot flyover to give us a perspective of, you know, when you get into the complex CEU side of things, what the management inside of LMS can help you alleviate a lot of that pain and suffering, as I like to say. Real quick, so the multiple jurisdictions you can create, I created a simple one here just to kind of give us an idea. where you can define the CEU types, the learning levels, and your delivery method. So that's the rule you would apply into the CEU itself. Once you look at that curriculum in there, you can define inside the curriculum what CEU really looks like for that course. So if I wanted to add a rule, I could add my rule, pick the delivery method I'm going to choose, what the type is, etc., give it a value, and then that piece of curriculum, whether it's an instructor-led or a CBT or it's a compliance path or a learning path or whatever the case may be, now has that information tied to it. You can track it internally via reporting individually or, as a global entity. You can see my information here in this simple test. And also, as you talked about, part of the pieces is getting the information over to the governing bodies themselves, whether it's Learn Live to get into NASBA or whatever the case may be. The feeds are set up from the application so it can be automated. So as people complete stuff, as CEUs get earned, as that information gets generated, it can be populated over to the governing body so they can then, they can manage all the complexities of what the hour's worth in which delivery method for which type. Do you have overage hours? Does self-study count? Do you have, are you an instructor where you get double credit in some places, and it manages that whole piece of it as you push it over to it. That's a quick snapshot at it there, John.
Nice. That's good stuff. We got a question in here about how come we didn't mention insurance. Only because I can't mention every industry. Insurance is certainly a huge one here with continuing education credits that follows that same level of complexity.
Yeah, definitely. We understand that industry well. One of our biggest verticals is insurance, and we understand that whole piece. I mean, there's a lot of it there, right? So reporting back to the state, if you just look at life and health or just life itself, you have pre-licensing and debt cert and ACMs and a lot of stuff that you have to manage that gets back to the governing bodies themselves.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Somebody asked, what's the standard for a credit? And for the International Association of Continuing Education, I'm not sure if I got that acronym right, they do classify it as 1 credit hour to 10 contact hours so you actually have to spend 10 hours in the classroom to get that. But what we've seen here is industries really evolve away from that, and not all industries, but many industries evolving to a 1-to-1 or even that 50 minutes to 1 hour that we saw. Answer some questions here. They're coming in fast and furious. All right, Bill. Well, it looks like we're over as we always are here. So we'll wrap up these last couple points here for everybody. So the 4th best practice is integrate. And what this means is all of the administration, all that complex CEU is all caused by lack of integration or lack of the LMS being strong enough to manage it. So, but the problem can be solved 2 ways. If it's not the LMS, then it can be solved through integration or a combination of the 2. And so sharing data like who your users are, from your association management system, or leveraging your existing e-commerce application that an organization has, through their ERP or website, or using, linking in the social media so that users can create accounts or, post continuing education or their completion of such to social media accounts, tracking into those accreditation bodies, the CE trackers provided by some of the accreditation like PARS and Monitor and Learn Live, for example, in NASBA. Tying into the customer relationship management system so that you can notify the doctors or physicians or insurance agents that they have requirements or continuing education. So if you haven't explored this inside your own organization, integration isn't what it used to be. It's not these big, $15,000, $20,000 one-way or two-way custom-built integrations all the time. In the industry right now, it's just getting easier and easier with like RESTful APIs or different available APIs that allow you to just snap systems together a whole lot easier than you used to. And so if you haven't explored this in a while, it's something to explore with your internal IT department, because it's really not that hard. And if you could just enter things in once versus 2 times or 3 times, just imagine how much time and error that you save. And finally, the best practice number 5 is automate reporting. So we had at the beginning of this poll, I think 20-some percent thought reporting was the challenge, and reporting is the challenge because none of the data resides in one system. So you're always in this situation where you got to collate data or combine data from different sources to be effective. And this is all part of that business process audit, of really looking to see, in that business process audit, is identify who are all the audiences that you report to, what reports do they get, how much manual intervention and manipulation and filtering do you do with those reports before you send them. All those things are important to identify because this is another area that's really evolved in the last 5 years from a functionality standpoint. Is the technology exists now to really automate a lot of reporting, who the audience is, what report it is, what data is going to be pulled, in what format, and give it in a dashboard format, and push it to their mobile device. All these things are available now inside the industry, and automatically schedule those reports so you can see it or pass it on to executives once a week or every day, or however often that you need to see that, or automatically dump your data into a bigger database that can be combined at the organizational level, like into a Microsoft Dynamics Azure CRM, for example, so that you can run reports across multiple systems in one central place. So finding ways to automate for the end users, for the learners, for the managers, and for the accreditation bodies has value in every one of those buckets. And there's opportunities, if you're doing anything manual right now, to shore that up. So in conclusion here, the complex CEUs are exactly that. 1 hour or 53 minutes just doesn't do it justice on how complex and the industry by industry and country by country and jurisdiction by jurisdiction complications, or you can continue to dive into this topic forever. And this is one of my favorite ones. You'll see a lot more coming out of Talented Learning here on continuing education to help the different vertical sectors. But the takeaway today is that the jurisdictions, the multi-jurisdictions, is what causes the continuing education complexity. And because of that, there's not really any technology out there that 100% automates this whole process for every industry. So as a result, there is manual intervention. The degree of manual intervention varies from organization to organization, but it is that manual intervention that is the cause of all the headaches and the problems. And if you can identify that manual intervention and solve them one by one, Rome wasn't built in a day. You won't be able to do it tomorrow. But what if you just knocked out one manual intervention tomorrow and another one in 2 months? Before you know it, you'd have a streamlined operated system. But it all starts with doing that ecosystem audit. What do you really need? Who are all the players? What technology do you have now? What business processes are manual? What's the current technology landscape? What can your current vendors do? Is there a place that I can sunset content? Can I integrate better to share data and avoid duplicate and triplicate entry? Can I automate reporting and streamline that process? The best organizations are, and the best organizations are knocking the complex out of complex continuing education by being smart about it. So there you have it, folks. Thanks for attending here. I'll go look here for some additional questions. Does continuing education lower the insurance costs? I think so. It would in some industry. What is the incentive? Here's another question. What's the incentive for an organization to get employees to take continuing education? Well, if it is, if it's your employees, you have that nice incentive called mandatory. So, hey, thanks for sharing, take this content. You can always take that draconian approach to it. But I just talked to, I was just speaking with a professional from GE, one of the branches of GE yesterday, and he was currently getting his certification in executive coaching. And I just couldn't help myself by, asking him all about that program and the accreditation body and who was the provider and how many hours of content. But I asked him that very question of, why even take that? Does GE care? And the answer was, not only does GE care, but GE pays for it, encourages them to take it, will most likely give them a raise. It's tied to performance, their performance reviews that they actually, achieve that certification. GE now has a certified executive coach, another one as part of their cadre of leadership, and to the individual, he has a portable degree that he could potentially shop elsewhere in the marketplace. So that's a great example of the organization kind of helping you out and the individual getting something out of it too.
Hey John, just to follow up on that, so a client of ours that everybody's familiar with named Pods built an internal certification for their drivers, and based on the level of the certification they got to, was a bonus structure for them internally. They then took that to the state of Florida, which is where their home base was, and reduced their workman's comp by 3%. Now you think of that across the size of a company, Pods, a 3% decrease in your workman's comp. Just a simple example to kind of help you answer that question.
Wow.
In that they built their own certification internally with their own matrix.
Wow. Wow. Here's I love measurable results.
Yeah.
Here's a question. What about pre and post test to measure the learner knowledge? Yeah, I'm telling you, 50 minutes just isn't long enough. But
sure.
That is a mandatory piece of all continuing education, mainly from getting your content accredited. You have just about every accreditation agency has strict rules in how you create the content, but then constantly measuring the effectiveness of the content, and that's done through pre and post tests. That's also done through surveys and evaluations, at the time of taking the content and later on down the road. And part of managing this is the ability to do that psychometric analysis, big word on the pre and post test, so that you could see the standard deviation and the average and the norm and the mean of how people are answering each and every question, and how valid that question is. And good LMSs, some of the best I've seen, actually do a lot, have the reports all formatted with that level of psychometric analysis already built in. But a big challenge organizations have, a lot of times they have to either bring a psychometric analysis professional on staff or go sub that out, which is a pretty expensive thing to do. So yeah, that's definitely a feature set that needs to be inside your overall, your overall learning management system, in my opinion. All right. I don't think there's any more questions. All right. Well, thank you everybody for your attendance today. We'll send you that white paper. Hopefully you enjoyed that. I just did 2 nice blog posts here in the last week on talented learning on this very topic. You can dig into that also, and got a new one coming out about the levels of LMS adherence. So we encourage you to reach out to Bill or I via our email or via Twitter, and give us any feedback from today. Give us any additional stories. If you want me to give you a ring, I'd love to interview you and hear your complex continuing education story, as I on a mission here to learn everything that I can. So thanks again, everybody, for attending. We'll see you on the next one. Thank you, sir, Bill Snowdon, CTO, eLogic Learning, for joining me here today and offering some great insight.
My pleasure. Thank you, John.
You're welcome. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye-bye.